Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Brexit Secretary has insisted the UK will continue to meet high trading standards when it leaves the EU. David Davis, speaking to business leaders in Vienna, said the UK wanted to lead a global race to the top in rights and standards, not a competitive race to the bottom. Labour claims the UK will face massive deregulation after Brexit, threatening the quality of food and the environment, as well as long-standing workers' rights. Here's our political correspondent, Vicky Young.
The UK's decided to carve out a different path to the European Union, but ministers don't seem to be preparing for a sharp change in direction. The message here in Vienna was more about reassurance.
Well, thanks for being here.
David Davis denying accusations from Labour that the government plans to sweep away rules that protect workers or the environment.
They fear that Brexit could lead to an Anglo-Saxon race to the bottom, with Britain plunged into a Mad Max-style world borrowed from dystopian fiction. These fears about a race to the bottom are based on nothing.
He argued that high standards could help ensure trade with the EU remained as frictionless as possible, with both sides recognising each other's rules and institutions.
Is that these goals will not change the kind of country Britain is. A dynamic and open country that supports businesses like yours to grow, to invest and to innovate in a competitive, open and fair market.
Some of the business leaders in the audience who want to keep close ties with Britain were encouraged by Mr Davis's words.
I think his tone is now different than it was maybe 1 year ago. In reality, hopefully will bring us together.
At the end, there will be a close relationship between EU and UK. Otherwise, nobody will win.
David Davis's words today are a far cry from what many in his own party have been saying about the need to break away from the burden of EU red tape that's been stifling British business for decades. He prefers to talk now about ongoing cooperation and mutual trust with the European Union after Brexit. Cabinet ministers have been touring European capitals in recent days, urging EU leaders to be pragmatic about Brexit negotiations. But Labour say it's the British government that needs to make some decisions.
The problem is that you've got David Davis saying one thing, Boris Johnson saying something else, and the Prime Minister saying almost nothing. It's got to be resolved. There's a basic question here, which is, do you want to stay close in trading terms to the EU, or do you want to be distant and different?
David Davis says he's certain a good deal with Brussels is on the cards, but discord amongst his colleagues needs to be dealt with first. Vicky Young, BBC News, Vienna.
The Brexit Secretary David Davis says leaving the EU will not turn Britain into a post-apocalyptic hell like in the Mad Max movies. Speaking to business leaders in Vienna, Mr Davis insisted things in the UK would stay largely the same, including regulations, something not all his cabinet colleagues agree with. Well, our Europe editor James Mates reports on the vision of a post-Brexit Britain.
It's coming. Get ready. Yes. Yes.
Whether or not Brexit turns Britain into a land flowing with milk and honey, we are absolutely assured it will not become this.
I am your Redeemer!
No Mad Max-style post-apocalyptic future for us, because whatever else you may have heard, Brexit Secretary David Davis now promises there will be no bonfire of regulations. In fact, he told his Austrian audience everything's staying pretty much the same.
They fear that Brexit could lead to an Anglo-Saxon race to the bottom, with Britain plunged into a Mad Max-style world borrowed from dystopian fiction. These fears about a race to the bottom are based on nothing.
For some years now, your Brexit colleagues have been telling us that we simply had to escape the dead hand of EU regulation and red tape if we are to thrive. Now, according to your speech today, it turns out that all this time the UK was leading the way, even designing a lot of this regulation. Have we been misled?
What this is about is choosing the future which is best for Britain. What I've been arguing today is that that is a future which involves high standards, not necessarily identical standards, in fact probably not identical standards to the European Union, but one that allows us to have free trade between us.
What Davis wants is for the EU and UK to recognise each other's standards post-Brexit. So these British-built cars, for example, could continue to be sold in Vienna on the basis of British regulations. But as Labour point out, to get European agreement on that, cabinet ministers may have to start agreeing with each other.
Some leading members of the cabinet have openly said that they want to deregulate, they want to get rid of protections at work, and that's why they drove the campaign to Brexit. So that's obviously the agenda.
Despite the bitter cold, the Brexit Secretary's apparent conversion to a high standards, high regulation economic model got a warm welcome in Vienna. They'll be happy too in Brussels, though they're likely to insist on some pretty cast iron guarantees. James Mates, ITV News, Vienna.
Now, if you were worried that Britain could descend into a Mad Max-style dystopia after Brexit, unregulated, uncontrolled bandits roaming the empty roads, the ministers have insisted that this nightmare scenario won't happen. And if you weren't worried about it before, maybe all this talk of chaos and a race to the bottom might make you worried now, as our business editor Siobhan Kennedy reports.
They fear that Brexit could lead to an Anglo-Saxon race to the bottom, with Britain plunged into a Mad Max-style world,
The image of Britain descending into Mad Max-style dystopian chaos wasn't on most people's minds this morning, not until the Brexit Secretary David Davis himself put it there.
These fears about a race to the bottom are based
on nothing.
He was in the genteel surroundings of Vienna, selling his vision of a post-Brexit world to business leaders. A world where even-handed cooperation and common principles rule, even after Britain leaves the EU.
This will be a crucial part of ensuring our future economic partnership is an open one and that trade remains as frictionless as possible. I am certain that is in the interests of both sides.
Meanwhile, in London, another Brexiteer was outlining his vision. Mr. Fox, what's your vision of a post-Brexit Britain? Is it like Mad Max? What's your vision?
Prosperous, stable and secure.
While Liam Fox didn't buy the Mad Max analogy either, he was less generous when it came to future EU relations.
If Europe erects barriers to trade and investment that do not exist today, it will make Europe less competitive in a global context and less attractive for international investors.
There are few industries where rules, regulations and civilised standards matter more than in British manufacturing, when products can cross borders multiple times before they're completed. So the idea of Britain dissolving into some type of unregulated dystopian hell sends shivers up these people's spines. So did Dr. Fox have any words of comfort for them?
I think he's doing his best in difficult circumstances.
It's not quite the same as saying you're confident he's the man.
I don't have a lot of confidence in Brexit.
I thought it was odd that he couldn't get off stage quick enough. Came along, delivered his message, ran off stage, didn't shake the person's hand, already in the taxi. Odd, isn't it?
I think he's got it spot on. I think he backs the industry. I think there's some very good figures coming out of there. We'll be ready to export the minute we get the sign, and export will grow.
Manufacturing has been the unlikely saviour of the British economy of late, generating a boom in exports. And while they constantly bemoan European red tape, they fear uncertainty and a Brexit-inspired cliff edge even more.
Frankly, this is getting a bit farcical. Today we've got David Davis trying to reassure us that there won't be any deregulation and a race to the bottom. Last week we had Boris Johnson championing deregulation and difference, two irreconcilable positions. This is farcical.
I am your redeemer!
Of course, David Davis didn't quite go that far.
It is by my hand you will rise from the ashes of this world!
But he does want to save Britain from the post-Brexit apocalypse he painted so luridly today.
I've been. Get